Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. This is the 116th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We are joined today by David Hogg, who's one of the great young activists in America today. We're honored with his presence. He has come from the Parkland shooting. He only has a half hour to be with us. He's working with JOHN Rosenthal and other organizations to get out the youth vote. We are going to give him the first half hour to talk with us about getting out the vote of young people in particular, and also the impact of the gun issue on the upcoming 22 election. David, we're glad to have you with us. This is being recorded. It will be sent out throughout the internet later on. Are you with us? Can we hear you?
Yep.
Okay, David, tell us, please. I will tell you, as I mentioned to you before, that my best friend growing up lost his grandson, Max Schachter, in the shooting. I don't know if you knew him or not. He was a sweet young man, and absolutely horrifying what happened to him and the rest of your classmates. We're glad to have you with us. Tell us, please, the nature of your campaigning right now and the impact you expect to have on the 22 election.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. The work that we do, I really have two main lanes of work that I do. One is at March for Our Lives, the organization that we started after the Parkland shooting, specifically aimed at turning out young people to vote for morally just leaders that put kids before guns and protect kids and not weapons like the AR-15, like the shooter at my high school used. And the other lane that I've started working on this year is helping to turn out young people through the campaign I'm doing with John, which is America is Calling Vote. John Rosenthal has been an advocate in gun safety in Massachusetts for over 2 decades now. He's helped make the state of Massachusetts the safest state in the United States in terms of gun violence prevention. If every other state had the same gun laws or same gun death rate as Massachusetts, there would be 27,000 less gun deaths every single year in this country. And John came to me and said, I want to work on a campaign to help turn out young people to vote, an advertising campaign. So myself, along with Jacqueline Corn, who also is from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, my high school in Parkland, Florida, and is a fellow student classmate of mine now, are working with John to help turn out the youth vote, really by telling young people the work that has been done, that we have turned out and voted. And that's what's enabled things like the first gun safety bill in 30 years to pass. It's what's enabled the Inflation Reduction Act to pass, which has the most massive amount of spending in American history on fighting climate change, and things like student debt cancellation. So we're really trying to shift the message now with young people from going from, they don't want you to vote, which obviously is true. We've seen across the country an interesting, often not talked about part of voter suppression, which is youth voter suppression. And we've seen places like Ohio try to raise the age to vote in primaries and things like that just recently, over the past month. And anyways, we're trying to shift the message from just saying they don't want you to vote to this is what happens when we did vote. Because in 2018, we had one of the highest youth voter turnouts in a non-presidential midterm in American history. And in 2020, we had the highest youth voter turnout ever in American history. And right now, despite what the boomer pundits, no offense, say over and over again, they said in 2018 young people aren't going to turn out because we don't give a shit about politics. We turned out at record numbers. They said in 2020 we weren't going to turn out. We blew at all previous generations in terms of voter turnout out of the water when they were our age. We are voting at a higher rate than any other generation has in American history when they were between the ages of 18 and 29. It's still abysmally low, but it's also much higher than any previous generation has voted at when they were our age, and consistently turned out too. And I think we're seeing some early indications, despite low early voting numbers, we're seeing young people, I think it was in Wisconsin recently, just reporting yesterday, similar voter turnout I think it was to 2020, which would be remarkable. And I always say that if polls can be wrong about Republican turnout, as wrong as they were in 2016, I think that they can be also wrong for young turnout and Democratic turnout as well. And I think in this election, we have to remember the fact that young people are notoriously hard to poll. I don't pick up phone numbers that I don't recognize. So I think the polling is likely wrong, that if it's showing young people are not turning out. And yeah, so I'm hopeful that we're going to turn out at a similar rate to 2018 at minimum, which would be a major component of helping to keep a morally just majority that supports things like gun safety, supports things like fighting climate change and others in House and Senate. But we're going to see. So that's the main work that I've been doing. And I've also done some fundraising for political candidates and on my personal side. For candidates in Florida, including Maxwell Alejandro Frost from Val Demings Congressional District, Florida's 10th. I raised him over $350,000. He's 25 years old and will probably be the first Gen Z. He will for sure be the first Democratic Gen Z in Congress. His district is plus 14 for Dems. And for Val Demings, I've raised now over $700,000. So, that's not close to the $3.3 million that Marco Rubio took from the NRA, but that's a lot of money. And even if she doesn't win, which I really hope she does, and I think she can, I think it's a good message to send that, because the NRA is seen as such a bad organization, people are willing to donate. When a 22-year-old asks them to donate to fight against the NRA's deadly agenda, you can raise at least a third of the money that was given to you by this massive multi-hundred-million-dollar organization. So that's the kind of work that I've been doing, along with just focusing on trying to be at school as much as I can, because I'm in my senior year.
What school are you at?
I'm at Harvard.
Harvard. I never heard of that. Where is it?
It's in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. All right. So let me point out very quickly that the youth vote, which I guess, well, how do you define the youth vote right now, David? 18
to 29, 18 to 30.
Okay, so the millennial generations are defined by demographers as 1981 to 1996. Generally, they do these cohorts as roughly 15 years. So in the American electorate now, and then the Zoomers, of course, are from 1996 to 2011, 2012, something like that, right? So combined, millennials and Zoomers are now half the electorate, if not more. And the at least 50% of the eligibles to vote in the United States now are born after 1980. And the millennials are, of course, the most progressive generation in history, followed by the Zoomers, which may be more progressive. And I personally believe that a lot of that has to do with race. If you look at the racial makeup of the successive generations, the baby boom was more than 80% white. The Gen Y is about 75% white. The millennials are in the 60s or even high 50s, and the Zoomers are barely about 52% white. So that's a big piece, as best we can tell, of the demographic puzzle. And also, of course, the youth vote, which I, as a historian, consider the millennials and the Zoomers, voted over more than 60% against Trump. Okay, the meeting is now being live streamed, so that's good. Thank you for that, Steve. So we're both being live streamed and recorded. I do want to say one thing, David. We forgot to warn you, because we're rebroadcast on the radio. We avoid four-letter words. If you want to curse, you can do it in Yiddish, but beyond that, we do have a censorship problem. So, what is your magic formula now for getting out the youth vote? I talked to John Rosenthal earlier. He's doing a mass tweet. And this is, by the way, we have 54 people on right now. It tends to grow. What is your formula for getting out the vote? What are your key tools?
Well, in 2018, it was anger, and just tapping into the righteous indignation that every person who's ever been young knows. The kind of rebellious attitude of telling young people, just like, the most powerful motivator to any young person, at least if they're a teenager, like we were when we started. I was 17 years old when Parkland happened. The most powerful motivator to somebody like that is to tell them that your parents don't want you to, or the adults don't want you to. So that was what kind of the energy that we used in 2018. And what's been really amazing is that, millions of students walked out of their high schools in 2018. And I don't know if people truly understand from a historical perspective, the cultural impact that has had on our generation. Because those young people, when they walked out in 2018, a lot of them couldn't vote in 2018 because they weren't seniors in high school yet. And then in 2020, some more of them could vote. But now all of them that were in high school at the time are eligible to vote. And it wasn't college students that were walking out necessarily. It was mostly high school and even a lot of middle school students that I've talked to that now are at college, in college and stuff like that, talking about how that's why they're now studying. Just the other day, I was at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and a young man came up to me and said, your March for Our Lives and the walkout at my middle school is the reason why I am studying political science and started caring about politics in the first place. So I think a lot of the work that we needed to do has kind of already been done, because it's been a cultural shift in the perspective of Gen Z in making politics tangible. And also the fact that, frankly, Donald Trump did more than any president before in American history to show young people the impact, to make politics tangible to them and show them why it matters in a horrifying way, but he did. And I think that's helped motivate them. And now the message that we're trying to shift into, especially with America is Calling Vote, is going from just, this angsty, burn it all down attitude, which is valid at times. But realizing that, yes, we have made progress, and it has been slow because of things like the filibuster and otherwise, but we've made more young people. The current Congress that we have has done more to help young people, I would say, than arguably any Congress, possibly since the 1950s or 60s. And it's, I believe, because young people turned out, and that we've showed our voice through things like Sunrise Movement, through things like March for Our Lives and others, demanding things, like gun safety, climate change, addressing climate change and things like that. So the message that we're trying to do with America is Calling Vote is shift that cultural narrative within young people that I don't believe is sustainable, that I think, frankly, was one of the long-term unfortunate, I don't know if I'd say it was a mistake, but one of the unfortunate things about the 1960s that happened was because of the total chaos of everything going on at that time, and it was so decentralized, and the government was repeatedly letting people down because of things like Vietnam, and other things like that, and obviously systemic racism and all these other issues. That movement never fully transitioned to becoming institutionalized because it was so anti-establishment. And I think what happened is there was a counter revolution to that happened within the Republican Party. We see this with the primary Barry Goldwater, and wanting to literally nuke Vietnam. We see this with the primary, various Republican primaries, especially starting in Orange County, California, later on in the 50s, later on in the 60s, going onward, where we see people take over their state GOP parties and make them further and further right-wing. And this is when we start to see the coalition forming between evangelicals and conservatives, especially anti-abortion activists and anti-feminists. And from that, they were able to basically take all of the energy from the civil rights movement that was a counter to that was an equal and opposite reaction, except they put it 100% into being institutionalized power, starting from the ground level up. And I think with our generation, we have seen the power of that, because they now have the Supreme Court. They now have gerrymandered all of these places. We now have several dozen, or in Congress, over 100 people running that are full-blown election deniers. We have people running for secretaries of state from the Republican Party that are election deniers, and governor and attorney general, every single part of the ballot running across the country. And I think what we have to do is we have to take the anti-establishment energy that we started out with in 2018 and start electing young people like Maxwell Alejandro Frost and others, especially at the state level and in Congress, to show young people that young people are involved in politics, and we have to work through these institutions as much as possible to start gaining our power now. Because while we may not have billions of dollars, we have the second most valuable thing that anybody in politics can have, which is time, because we're going to outlive everybody in Congress. So,
right.
it's about how do we take those lessons from the 1960s and not repeat them, at least the parts that are within our control. And that's the kind of focus that we have through America's Calling Vote, is to show young people the impact that they have had voting, and that while voting is part of the answer, it is only just that. It is just part of it. It is one tool that you have in your toolbox. But the message that we're sending to young people is, if you truly are dedicated to creating change, it's not about having a sexy president or somebody that you're inspired by running on a major ticket. You are voting in every election because that is just what we do. We are a generation of organizers. We're a generation of activists that want to create a better world for our children. And we know that's going to take time. So in order to do that, we're not just voting in presidential elections, we are voting in every single election, every single time. The same way that we aren't like, oh, wow, the Halloween candy this year isn't the best, so I'm just not going to celebrate Halloween. We just celebrate it because it's natural, because it's cultural. We are trying to do the same thing with voting, to turn out young people consistently and show them that it does work. But it is not something that changes overnight. You have to continue turning out. And it's not just being about burning everything down. That's the easy part. It's about, what are we going to build in its place to actually build a more perfect union and help future generations? Because we have to start turning out now to undo all the damage that has been done by these incredibly corrupt, morally and politically leaders that have brought us to this place, to the point that our children, we're seeing places like Texas not address how an 18-year-old gets an AR-15, but instead send out DNA kits so parents can identify their children after they've been slaughtered in their schools. If that's not a sign of a failing political system, I don't know what is. But that's the kind of message that we're trying to show young people, is that we know that this is our reality. We have to vote to start to change it. Voting is not the only part of that. There are many parts, such as activism and organizing, but voting is one tool in our toolkit that we have to use, because we're truly dedicated to creating a better world. We have to work together and use every tool at our disposal.
Excellent. Beautifully stated. I want to welcome John Rosenthal, your cohort, on, and he's going to take the baton from you at 5:30. We know you have to go. As a boomer who vaguely remembers the 1960s, I actually did speak at Woodstock in 1994. Essentially, our generation, I guess your parents' generation, set out to do two things. We set out to revolutionize the culture and to end the empire. And I think we did a pretty good job of revolutionizing the culture in many ways that you can't even.
People wear pants now.
What's that?
Women wear pants now.
Well, women are about to take over. That's the big one. But we did revolutionize the culture, but we did not end the empire. That's the job that you guys are going to have to do. And you beautifully stated it. We have 63 people on the call. For those of you who joined us late on the YouTube live stream, we're with David Hogg of America is Calling, and veteran of the Parkland shooting. He's joined by John Rosenthal, the founder of America's Calling, with David. We're talking about the generational changeover. You two will have to come back after the election. On this call, we had a revolutionary occurrence where Andrea Miller of the Center for Common Ground was linked up with Ray McClendon of the Georgia NAACP. And together they did the grassroots organizing that swung the 2 Senate seats in 2021. And one of the things that one of the primary things we advocate is taking the money that the Democratic Party, among others, has used for to buy ads and shift it instead to grassroots relational organizing. which we know. And, we saw the positive result in Atlanta and Georgia in 2021, where the state of Georgia, against all odds, as a historian, I can tell you, elected a Black man and a Jewish guy to the US Senate. To Virginia that fall, where the Democrats squandered millions of dollars on media advertising and did not pay their door-to-door canvassers and wound up with a Trumpian governor. So the basic rubric of organizing on the progressive side is what we're about. And of course, the youth vote, as I pointed out, half the electorate now was born after 1980. And more than half the electorate is women. And, a big part of our messaging here on these calls is the rise of the power of women and the return of matriarchy. In the book I sent you, The People's Spiral of US History, we discuss that the original democracies in North America, the indigenous tribes, were matriarchies. And, after 5,000 years of male domination, I think maybe it's time for a change. So David, while we have you for 6 more minutes, I want to call on Lynn Feinerman. She's got a question for you, and then Justin LeBlanc. Lynn, go ahead. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, I think so.
Lynn is a radio host, David and John, and a stalwart of our campaign and quite a brilliant woman. So go ahead, Lynn, please.
Thank you very much. Those are very kind words. First, I want to say a few kind words to you, David. I think you're awesome. I think your work is awesome. And I just want you to know I wish you all strength, and I'm just sending strength to you so you keep on going and you keep on doing your work. The next question is very simple. What can we do to help you?
Exactly. Go ahead, please, David.
Besides getting everyone you know to vote and voting yourself, obviously, one of the biggest problems that I have had to deal with over the past couple of years, and in March generally we've had, is it is just, frankly, I think liberals, when it comes to investing for change, if we were to have a metaphor for the stock market, liberals would be like trying to time the market on whatever new sexy technology there is out there and putting all of their eggs in one basket and just investing for one election cycle and then selling off once it doesn't succeed. Whereas conservatives like the Koch brothers and others invest in a generalized index fund like the S&P 500 for social change at every level, consistently every year, no matter the state of the market. And from that, they've been able to build an empire, politically speaking, from state legislatures, school boards, to Congress, to now the Supreme Court with the Federalist Society and others. March for Our Lives needs sustainable support. That's not just around one election. This is going to take more than one election to solve. And I've said from day one that the goal of March for Our Lives is to not exist anymore, because we want gun violence to end. But until that day comes, we need sustainable support so that we can fund the unsexy things that make the sexy things possible. Things like funding our staff so that they have, a salary, because they are the ones that actually give us the infrastructure to create the change in the first place. Because we can't just do this when this stuff gets in the news. It's an everyday process because kids are dying every day. So one, sustainable donations to March for Our Lives just once a month, $5 or $10, whatever you can, huge help. March for Our Lives has a little bit of a problem in that we are kind of like, maybe this is problematic to say, but I've always said that it's kind of like we're like the prettiest girl like in high school who doesn't get asked to prom because everybody thinks she's already been asked. March for Our Lives is not one of those major. We're probably one of the smallest national level gun violence prevention nonprofits. Yes, we have a bigger budget than obviously a lot of other gun violence prevention nonprofits at the more local level, but we're a national one that has kids across the country doing this work. We need sustainable support, and also America is Calling could use your support too, obviously. But my heart is always going to be with March First because that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. So that is what you can do.
Thank you. You can put the link in the chat. Justin LeBlanc, then Emily Levy, then Wendy and David. I want to emphasize that we need you and John to come back after the election to meet with Andrea Miller, Ray McClendon, and Ray Lutz is on here. The people who have really pioneered grassroots organizing in an extremely successful way that has moved the dial significantly on American politics. Okay, Justin, then Emily, then Wendy.
Hey, David, glad you're showing up to represent the country here, especially the people of your generation. You mentioned about putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm wondering how to break out of that, like alliances between academia and working class inner cities, alliances between city and rural folks, things such as, public transportation, safe pathways to work. What are your thoughts along those lines?
I think coalitions and activism can actually be very dangerous. And I didn't used to think that way, but after doing a lot of research myself in college on the kind of political science and papers that have been done about social movements, ones that form coalitions amongst a lot of spaces dissolve very quickly and become quite disastrous, because the second that somebody, for example, wants to, the way that those coalitions get broken up is they say, oh, we'll do this thing in A subject area, but not in B subject area. So it just causes people to be divided. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think people should work together. I think they should listen to each other and try to focus on things that everybody does agree is something that they need to turn out voters more, such as voter turnout, obviously, something that creates a rising tide for everybody. But I think the best thing that we can do in terms of working together is, just advertising the work that we're doing more through social media, especially for young people, to let them know, and doing more in-person, outreach. But even more than that, I think we need to make movements fun. As hard as these things are, people burn out a lot. And I don't think that we are ever going to succeed long-term if we're constantly just reacting to stuff and we're not acting proactively. And I also think that we need to focus on building culture and having fun together just as much as doing the work in the first place, because I believe it's from community and doing fun things together that sustainability or persistence is built, and from that you're eventually able to succeed. But it does take a long time, but it's in those moments where you're able to be around other people that you're able to kind of succeed. So
as my buddies Ben and Jerry said, if it's not fun, why do it? There are a couple of serious heroes of the voter protection movement on with us. John Brakey from Arizona, who put down the ninjas, so-called, in Arizona. Lynn Bernstein, who's taken some serious heat for her organizing in North Carolina. And I'm going to call on Emily Levy, who has a group called Scrutineers that you should know about. Go ahead, Emily, please. And David, I know it's 5:30. If you have to run, let me know. We have John Rosenthal on with us as well. But Emily, go ahead, please.
Thank you, David, so much for being here and for your work. And I'm sorry that it's been at such a great cost to you personally to be in this movement and to have arrived in this movement. I have two quick questions. One is, how do you respond to progressive people who say more gun control laws would only be enforced against people of color and wouldn't actually solve the question? And my second question is, in addition to encouraging young people to register to vote and to vote, are you trying to mobilize them around the elections in any other way? And if you don't have things to give them to do, we do, and I'd love to connect with you about it.
Right, she's particularly referring to monitoring at the polls, vote counting, protecting voters as they show up, things like that.
Not exactly, but
sorry, didn't want to put words in your mouth. Those are things that we've talked about on the calls.
Yeah, so I think can you remind me of the first part of your question? Sorry.
The first part was about people who say that gun control laws.
Got it. You're right. Well, I think that speaks more broadly to the issues that we already have at hand, which is a corrupt criminal justice system that we know disproportionately affects the most marginalized of our society. If we just focused on not creating laws in the first place because they're going to disproportionately affect people because of that entire system being messed up, then we wouldn't create laws, period. And that to me, that's not the answer. I think we need to have a holistic approach to addressing not just how somebody gets a gun, You know, we need to take a similar approach to what we did with cigarettes. And I think what I mean by that is we need to address the how and the why. We have to address the culture too. And the fact that cities like Parkland don't have shootings on a daily basis. And it's not because we have stronger gun laws than Miami-Dade County that often does have shootings on a daily basis. It's because we have resources. We have to attack this issue from the how and the why. We have to address why are young people picking up a gun in the first place, because it is disproportionately young people that are committing these acts of violence, not just mass shootings, but everyday acts of gun violence. And also the 2/3 of gun deaths that are suicides that are, I would often consider deaths of despair because they happen disproportionately in rural America with older men, middle-aged men that have access to guns. And I think we have to address the why of both of those. We have to address the why, our farmers and people in rural areas have so much divestment, such a lack of investment, and so much money getting pulled from there, and these communities are falling apart, right? And the systems that have enabled that, especially big agriculture, really being exploited, super exploitive to smaller scale farmers, because they're just trying to squeeze out that extra dollar from each one of them and essentially sending them into bankruptcy. But it also means addressing redlining, which is one of the top predictors of where shootings occur in the United States, is where communities were redlined by the US government. We have to address both of those. And I don't think it can be an either or. And I think what that looks like is things that like non-carceral based systems to help stop shootings before they happen. What these are called violence intervention programs. And what they do is they get a culturally trained, competent, therapist that looks like the community and is from the community. And often themselves, I've worked around people like this before, people that have come out of prison after themselves killing people that then go and work and stop young people from going down that same path. And from that, they're able to stop retaliation. Because along with redlining, the top predictor of who shoots somebody else in this country is whether or not that person has been shot themselves or if somebody they know has been shot, because it's retaliation. So the way that we can stop this violence in the first place isn't just laws, it's stopping people from using guns, culturally speaking, in the first place, by making them uncool, making them unsexy, like we did with cigarettes, and investing in programs that work to stop shootings before they happen by making sure young people that are at risk don't continue going down that path, instead of investing in more broken systems like policing that only are able to respond as a shooting is about to break out, or most of the time after somebody's already been killed or shot themselves, at which point I would say they've already failed, right? So we need to invest in the prevention side of it in the first place, and address the entire criminal justice system as a whole as well, especially things like cash bail, things like that.
Fantastic. The second part of your question, Emily. Emily, I should tell you, her scrutineers group does a superb training around elections, and has been really essential to the election protection movement. And you should be in touch, you and John, with Emily. Go ahead, Emily. Real quick, your second.
So my
Another second. We're turning out young people. We have a whole volunteer base and an organizing team that helps turn out young people. But honestly, Emily, I don't think young people, it would be great if you had more young people to help look at elections and ballot boxes and stuff like that. Young people don't have time, honestly. We don't have 401ks for the most part that are anywhere near retirement. We don't have our SEP IRAs set up. We don't have all these other things. We don't have time. It is not, unfortunately, we are not living in the post-World War II economy of the 1950s and 60s anymore, where young people can take out a ton of time to become politically involved. It's often the people with, it's a very privileged process to be able to have that amount of time. Many people have jobs, so I would say we're also a smaller population too, comparatively speaking to the boomer population, because if you look at the population graph, you literally have a larger population in many regards, or at least you have a lot more time typically. We need older people to go out there and watch polls more, which they do already, but we need more of them, instead of calling on young people to do even more than we're already being asked to do in the first place. Because the number one thing that I want young people focused on doing is just turning out and voting in the first place. Even if it's just that, it's the bare minimum.
Emily, do you want
There's
to?
one particular election night action that takes about a half an hour once that might be a good match. So if John's going to be on for the rest of the call, he'll hear about it and maybe we can connect about it later. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you guys. And please donate.
David, thank you very much for being with us. You missed meeting Wendy this time, but next time when you come back, we'll give her the first question, and we'll connect you with Emily more thoroughly, and also with Ray McClendon and Andrea Miller. We're now joined.
Great job, David. Nice to see you, buddy.
Thank you, David. No nukes. I hope when you were in San Luis Obispo, you went over and got arrested at the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. We can talk to you about that later as well. So thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. All right, we're now joined by John Rosenthal. I want to remind everyone we are live webcasting on YouTube. This is being recorded for posterity, and will also be broadcast on the Progressive Radio Network Thursday night. We do have more than 70 people on the call. John Rosenthal is also in Boston. Well, you're in Gloucester, I believe, and one of the great organizers, a fellow No Nuker. John and I each shared residency at the San Luis Obispo County Jail, trying to stop the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, and we're now in the midst of trying to shut it down. David, go ahead. If you'll tell us, please, about America is Calling and the tremendous organizing you're doing to get out the youth vote, that would be fabulous.
Thanks for having me. And I hope I'm sure you enjoyed David. I mean,
Fabulous.
It's really quite remarkable. I mean, the most public facing thing that David Hogg did before the Parkland massacre was being a Boy Scout leader. And yet he went to school in one of the greatest school systems in Florida, and had civics and history and TV production and debate classes. And it turns out, his issue was gun violence. And that was what he debated, and he was used to being in front of a camera. And, unlike the babies at Sandy Hook and their families, these teenagers were basically prepared to talk about gun violence at a time and talk about it differently. And he and I met as a result of, I'm a gun owner and a business person and live in Massachusetts. I started an organization called Stop Handgun Violence when I learned that in 1994, 106 Americans died every single day, including 15 kids under 19. And frankly, if you go back to 1975, that's more Americans killed by firearms in America than all U.S. servicemen and women killed in all foreign wars combined. I set out to try and turn bad public policy into good public policy and good public health outcomes. And so we changed the conversation in Massachusetts from the polar extremes of unlimited access to guns or banning all guns to how our kids, criminals, and dangerously mentally ill folks who are prohibited from getting guns, accessing them without detection. We passed a series of laws since 1994. We reduced the rate of gun deaths by 40% in Massachusetts. We have the lowest firearm fatality rate in the nation, along with Hawaii, and we proved that gun laws save lives. And we did it again by changing the conversation and exposing the insane public policy in America that regulates toy guns and teddy bears, but not real guns. And we created a model. Lo and behold, Massachusetts, also home of Smith & Wesson and George Washington's Armory, makes more firearms than almost any state in the nation, including the weapon used at Parkland. That Smith & Wesson AR-15 that slaughtered 17 and shot 17 more at Parkland, or hit 71 people in the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, killing 12. It was one of the many used at Las Vegas where 450 people were shot in minutes. It is not allowed to be owned in Massachusetts. It is not allowed to be sold in Massachusetts. But Smith & Wesson makes it here and exports death elsewhere. So David and I met because we did a march from Worcester, 50 miles to Smith & Wesson with survivors from Parkland. And then he quickly realized that rather than, the March for Our Lives having to reinvent what the solutions to gun violence are, they should just simply replicate the model that we've created over the last almost 30 years, improving that gun laws save lives without banning most guns. And he and I have been, we've become very close friends. And speaking about the having fun part, I'm continually reminded by, Emma Goldman's quote, "If I can't dance, I don't want to join your revolution." And, David and I have worked together while sailing and enjoying nature. And nonetheless, it comes down to these issues that we care so much about in the future of, frankly, of our children and grandchildren, is now come down to the future of freedom and democracy. I mean, it is not hyperbole to say that Vladimir Putin had a puppet in the White House for 4 years. He would still be there, but for 42,000 votes in 5 states. That's how close we came, as far as I'm concerned, to the end of freedom and democracy. Not to say that it wouldn't change in the future, but it's a lot harder to get it back once you've lost it. And you can look at the Electoral College and understand the systemic issues around minority government in America, but that's the way it's been. But we haven't seen such an assault on freedom and democracy as we have seen with the Trump Bannon approach. And if you haven't read the book How Democracies Die by Zieblitz and Levitsky at Harvard, pick it up. It
John,
is the
you are importantly, and this is an election protection and GOTV a constituency. You very importantly are pioneering an incredible campaign to get out the youth vote in particular and votes in general. And you told me earlier in the day that you've done a Twitter buy or a social media buy aimed at getting young people out. Can you put that link in the chat and send it to Steve so that we can maybe play the 30-second spot that you developed?
I just sent it to you, Harb, if you can pull it up.
If you can send it to Steve S. Caruso 1 or put it in the chat, Steve could pick it out of the chat. Our engineer here, who's being a one-armed paper hanger today.
Yeah.
And if you can send it to him, he'll put it up and we'll take a look.
So what's the
chat?
email?
Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, no, I know. Who do I send it to?
Steve. Well, you can send it to everyone, but it's Stephen Engineer. He's the one driving the train.
Yeah, Stephen Engineer. Okay, I'm not sure I can just cut and paste it.
Okay, I'll see if I
links.
can dig it up too.
But you have the links. But
So tell us about what you're doing, John.
Sure.
Exactly.
So what we did is, if you haven't heard of a world-renowned creative, branding, design creative by the name of Bruce Mau, check him out, M-A-U. I saw a documentary about the work he had done. He was hired by Coca-Cola to come up with a new brand. He came up with Coca's Life, Live Positively and Sustainable Plastics. He literally redesigned Mecca after 717 people were trampled there. And the education minister in Guatemala hired him to come up with a curriculum around democracy in an autocratic country. I literally got in touch with him and hired him to help rebrand democracy. And I said that the thing we need first is a slogan that doesn't have to be explained, like Uncle Sam needs you, like It's Morning in America, Reagan, or Stop the Steal, Make America Great Again. We came up with America is calling. Vote. Answer the call. stand up for freedom and democracy, vote. The idea was to combat voter suppression like we are seeing like never before. The MAGA Republican approach to politics is suppress and repress votes, because they know if people come out and vote, they're not going to vote for them. So the idea was to come up with a nonpartisan, bipartisan reminder of the importance of our civic duty to vote. And then we went out and tested it. America is calling, the future is calling, freedom is calling, answer the call, the calling, you know, like a religious calling, resonated really well. But voter engagement voted quite, there was a serious deficit among young people. I mean, remember, David and his cohort, you know, born after 2000, have never known the American dream. They have never known a day in school without the risk of being shot. 9/11, you know, Trump, a violent insurrection at the US, an armed insurrection at the US Capitol. So the idea was we had to get, and when they came out in 18 and 20, in fact, they came out in higher numbers than ever before. And in 2020, 66% of the electorate came out to vote, and we threw Trump out only by 42,000 votes. We need the same or better turnout in the midterms, which typically go against the sitting president, and then ultimately in 24. And we need to build a movement. There's a long history of student movements and young people changing policy and changing bad public policy in America, stopping the war in Vietnam, bringing about the vote, civil rights. I mean, democracy's always been aspirational. It's never, and liberty, never been pure in any way, shape, or form, but it's under attack like never before. So we raised a couple $1 million. And the idea was that we would, here's one of our ads focused at young people.
Go ahead, play it, Steve,
They
please.
said we wouldn't vote, but we showed them student loan relief helping millions, a game-changing investment in climate and clean energy, and the first gun safety bill passed in 30 years. We did that. So if anyone thinks we're gonna let extremists undo it all, let the big corporations continue to hoard wealth, and let fanatics pass a national abortion ban, no, that. This is about our freedom, our safety. We'll show them once again. Let's go vote.
Wow. Okay.
That's one. And Stephen, there's another one if you want to show that. We have, so this is a digital campaign. We are up in New Hampshire, North Carolina, 2 states saturated with investment. We really wanted to buttress and help save the Senate seats and gain Senate seats. Here we go again.
Here's the second one. Go ahead.
The ultra-rich, big oil, and gun makers, they don't want us to care. They want to keep their power and their private jets at the expense of our safety and our clean air and water. But no more. We showed up in record numbers, and we forced big changes. And we will do it again to protect kids in school, to keep our air and water clean and healthy. We're answering the call for our freedom, for our future. Let's vote.
Okay, excellent. Now, where did those go?
So those went up. They've been running in New Hampshire for about 3 weeks, North Carolina, and as of today, we just bought a week of digital in Pennsylvania.
What do you mean by digital? Where did you put it exactly?
So Facebook, Instagram, streaming, you know, phones, where kids are, not on television for the most part. I mean, Apple TV is included, but in targeted to where young people are, to remind them and motivate, inspire them to vote. As a result of them voting in 18 and 20, we have finally, created some change in Congress, and through, the MAGA Republican out of the White House. Now, he hasn't gone away, and the efforts to suppress votes are very targeted at basically, the House and the Senate. And then the big fight will be, in 24. So this is about creating a youth movement around civic engagement and voting. They have the most to win and the most to lose, but it's got to be more than just, every election cycle. It's got to be a sustainable movement of young people. The baby boomers are the last generation to have it better than our parents, and shame on us for the world that we have created for young people who, don't know what even, the aspirational American dream was, never mind having a chance at it and owning a home and a whole lot of other things that we benefited from, but the next generations are not. And it's time that this youth movement, take control, because our generation has dramatically dropped the ball. So that's what America's Calling is about. And, I'm cautiously optimistic that we may hold the Senate or even gain a seat. I think we will lose the House. And if it's between DeSantis and Trump, God help us, because they're both, horrors. And I'll leave you with one and then we can get into questions. But I had dinner with Mark Kelly from Arizona. I mean, the guy, 4 trips to the space station, 397 takeoff and landings, off of aircraft carriers. He talked about January 6th, and he and a few other senators were thinking about maybe trying to hold their ground in the Senate chamber when the armed insurrectionists, stormed the Capitol. And, he turned white telling me about the arms that he saw people carry when he realized there was no way they could hold the Senate. And then he went on, we talked about, Trump and DeSantis, and he said, John, I'm actually, I'm more worried about DeSantis winning. One, he's smarter, and 2, there will be war. I mean, Trump will incite a civil war. And he said, in that sense, I think I'd rather have Trump win. I mean, we are on the verge of the end of democracy in America.
One thing that hasn't been discussed much about the Senate also is judicial appointments. But Biden has been very slow to make judicial appointments, and the Senate controls them. If the Senate is lost, the judiciary is going to be lost. Trump appointed over 200 judges, and I don't know how many Biden has, but it's nowhere near that. John, can you take a question from Wendy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wendy was up with David Hogg, and then we'll go to Mary. Wendy, do you want to carry over your question? You want to just skip it?
Thanks. I appreciate you being here. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, so I wanted to say hi to David and thank him, and just let him know that I'm with the State Progressive Caucus. I'm close with the president, so if you guys want to link up and we can see how to support each other, but we can reach out later or keep the conversation going moving forward. Thank you.
And John, I want to make sure, as I mentioned to David, you come back. You need, with your campaigning, to meet Ray McClendon from the Georgia NAACP and Andrea Miller from the Center for Common Ground, and other John Steiner and other great people who do focus on grassroots organizing. We also have John Breaking on the call, who's the key to the democracy movement in Arizona. So after the election, we will have you guys back and have a major brainstorm. As I've mentioned to you, a major focus of ours is to shift money from the traditional Democratic Party purchase of major media buys to grassroots organizing, which made the difference in Georgia 2021 and has really changed the world. Mary Butler, and then anyone else who wants to ask, please raise your hand. Mary, if you'll go for 90 seconds, that would be great.
We got 3 minutes left to the segment, end of the segment.
Okay, well, we'll continue as Steve, as long as John is with us. Steve is going to have a nervous breakdown in the middle of this. He's really running the show here, and he's in Central.
Probably not his first barbecue working with you, Sluggo.
All right, go ahead, Mary, please.
Okay, John, first of all, I've always thought that in order for us to keep a grip on gun control, we should actually have ballistics of every gun that's manufactured, and before it's resold, ballistics has to be done and be put on a database. So that way, when we find a bullet on the scene, we can find the gun. Secondly, we could reduce a lot of this at schools if we had more stringent bullying laws, because 90% of these kids that go crazy were victimized for years and years and years, and nobody did anything. And then finally, hooray on 16 and up being allowed to vote, because if you're young enough to die for your country, you should be young enough to vote for it.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that.
Yeah, let me just, truth is stranger than fiction when it comes to gun policy. You know, I mentioned the fact that, you know, that we regulate toy guns, but we don't regulate real guns. I mean, when you hunt in America, everyone has to get a hunting license. Now, there's no license requirement for hunting. There's no, I mean, for owning it or purchasing a gun, there's no background check requirement in 32 states. But when you do hunt, you are required to have a license. And when you hunt deer, you're limited to 5 rounds. When you hunt duck, you're limited to 3 rounds to protect the duck and deer population. When you hunt humans, no limit. We give police officers 13 to 17 rounds in their service weapons to protect us. Congress gives 35 to 100 round magazines to outgun cops and kill as many people as possible without having to reload. The kids at Sandy Hook, and I met their many, I meet parents of dead children every day since every week since 1994. The AR-15, I was on MSNBC after Sandy Hook with General McChrystal, and he was describing what the AR-15 and the 223 round is designed to do. It's a round and it's a weapon of war. The round is designed to not to penetrate your body, but to hit your body and expand. The entry wound is like this. The exit wound is like this. And those children, like the children, all over that are being hit by these AR-15s, have to be identified by their clothing because they're indistinguishable looking. These are weapons of war. There's no purpose in a civilized society for them. And gun policy in America is basically you deregulate guns, you give immunity against lawsuits to the industry. You have no manufacturing standards. You have no background check requirement. You have no licensing requirement like an automobile in order to increase gun violence, increase fear, and increase gun sales for the uniquely unregulated gun industry. And all we did in Massachusetts, we treat guns like cars, safety training. You got to lock up your gun if you're not in your direct control. Licensing, renewable licensing like automobiles. We ban military style weapons and large capacity ammunition magazines designed to outgun cops. We have proven that you can effectively reduce injuries and deaths without banning guns. And if every state had the same gun death rate, now we only ban military style weapons and cheap Saturday night specials without safety features in the Commonwealth. If every state had the same low gun death rate as Massachusetts, 27,000 lives would be saved.
Wait a minute. Somebody's got a ban. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, say that again, John.
If every state had the same low gun death rate per 100,000 population as Massachusetts, which is an urban state, 27,000 lives would be saved a year without banning anything except for assault weapons and cheap Saturday night specials. There's the hope, but there isn't the political will. And we have got to change Congress in order to change national gun laws.
Okay, John Rosenthal, you're magnificent. Your group is America is Calling. You're also involved with David Hogg at March for Our Lives.
And
If you
stop
stay,
handgun
we'll-
violence.
And stop handgun violence if you can. And we want you back, as I mentioned, to meet Andrea Miller, Ray McClendon, and other stalwarts of the grassroots emergency election protection movement. We do have on with us two great heroes, Lynn Bernstein and John Brakey. So I'm hoping you can stay a bit back past the break. We'll take two more questions for you.
Sure.
Then we'll break the tape, and we will. We're continuing to live stream on YouTube, and we'll use you and David, your tape on the PRN show Thursday night. Go ahead, Justin LeBlanc and then Alex Williams, and then we're going to break. We won't turn it off. We're just going to break the tape, and we'll go to John Brakey, Lynn Bernstein, and our discussion on election protection, Richard, Dan Wolf as well. Go ahead, Justin and Alex.
So John, we've heard you talk a lot about the technical aspects of guns, but I'm curious about the cultural aspects, as David mentioned as well. One of the things that I was well aware of is a program that makes drunk driving unsexy, offered during basically high school homecoming half times. It's an immersive program where people who are most at risk for that kind of behavior are actually put in the drama so they can experience the feeling of the consequences. So I'm wondering if something similar is being done in terms of gun violence and to make shooting unsexy. The other thing is when it comes to, some people have said, doing things on social media platforms, I find that to be actually much less effective, kind of like knocking on doors is much more effective for getting out voters than doing TV ads. But if you got any thoughts on that, appreciate that.
Yeah, I started this whole effort back in '94 because I bought a building next to Fenway Park that had frontage on the Massachusetts Turnpike. And I wanted to put up a message that might have an impact on some bad public health policy and change it into good public health policy. And that's when I learned about gun violence and built a 250-foot billboard on the Mass Pike, put up 15 beautiful color photographs of kids killed by guns and said the cost of handguns keeps going up, 15 kids killed every day. And we changed that over the years. And I mean, literally presidents would tell me they would change their entourage route to see this billboard. And every legislator saw the billboard. And so it was like a front page. And it ended up being the sort of the catalyst of changing the conversation from the polar extremes and ultimately getting gun bills passed. 3 out of 4 of our gun bills were literally signed into law by Republican governors in the Commonwealth. So we effectively did change the conversation from the polar extremes without demonizing gun owners. I mean, the fact is, there is a culture in America around guns, but it does not, and the majority of gun owners support, banning assault weapons and background checks. Yeah, and clearly, as David said, having gun violence, prevention curriculums and anti-bullying and all kinds of things. But what we find is, there's a mass shooting of 4 more people every single day. I mean, today, another 100+ people will die. And it's never about the gun. It's always about, sort of mental illness or this, that, and the other thing. The fact is, every country has mentally ill people. No other country arms them with military-style assault weapons without detection. So, I mean, we have to address the firearm and unrestricted access to the firearm to have the biggest impact in the shortest period of time. Clearly, long term, you got to deal with violence and male violence and a lot of things. But when you look at Detroit versus Windsor, you look at Seattle versus Vancouver. Everyone sees the same stuff. The difference is easy access to guns. There is very little gun violence in Canada, and there's an epidemic in America, and it's about easy access to guns.
Right, and it's quite shocking, actually. And of course, we hope this plays out in the election, that you'll be able in this and further elections, future elections, to tie gun deaths to electoral issues and getting out the vote. Alex Williams will have the last question here. We're going to let John sum up, and then we're definitely, John, I hope you can stay and meet with John Brakey and Lynn Bernstein.
Sure.
Others, that will be terrific. Go ahead, Alex. Alex Williams.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for being there. I agree with the gun thing. I think it is, first of all, it's crazy that they limit you to 3 rounds or 5 rounds for hunting deer or ducks. I mean, but unlimited for people. I mean, but anyway, that gets what I want to say. I think it's a both and. The culture has to change so that people don't have to show their manhood or womanhood or whatever by pulling guns or beating up people. And I think that has to do with faith of some kind. I don't care what kind of faith it is, but you have to believe in a power greater than yourself so that you can get outside of yourself. But then at the same time, and care about other people. Then at the same time, we have to get rid of these crazy gun laws. Put in place the gun regulations. You know, no, like he said, nobody should have an AR-15. Nobody. There's no reason for that. And yeah, you know, why can't you limit the amount of rounds you carry? You do it for ducks. Why not people?
Well, here's the question. Why are these people showing up at the polls now in Arizona and elsewhere with guns to intimidate potential voters? Yeah. And why has the court not intervened? You can get arrested for bringing pizza to people standing in line waiting to vote, but if you show up with a gun, that's perfectly fine. It's insane.
Totally.
Well, that's
insane.
the last. This is one last thing I want to say. I think it might be time for America to split, because you know why these people are doing what they're doing, and I don't see us. We live in a state-by-state system, and the crazies are spread out. They might be concentrated in the South and Midwest, but they're really spread out everywhere. And I just don't see us being able to have nice things with them around. It just they won't allow it. We already see it. They will not allow it.
So
we can't have gun control because of them.
Are you advocating we set up asylum states for people who are, of one mind?
I'm secession.
Yeah. Okay.
Only this time the North does it.
On that note, John, thank you, Alex. John, we're going to give you. We're more than 70 people on the call still, and we're still being live streamed, which we're going to continue with. You want to have a last word? Then we're going to break the tape, and we will.
Sure. Look, those of us that are on this call are lucky enough to be able to think about this stuff, and it's incumbent upon us to participate in our democracy. I got involved in this issue. I got involved as an activist in high school, where my English teacher said we were going to do something different, and he showed the actual Holocaust films. Wow. He showed the black and white films, the emaciated bodies, the bulldozers in the trenches. And I realized if I were born then and there with my last name, I'd be dead. So do something with your good fortune. And there are more of us than there are of, quote, them.
That's right.
And, Bill Bryson in one of his great books wrote, if you're lucky enough to live to be 90, that's 780,000 hours. That's all you get. And what you do with those moments and those hours is all you have. And who you connect with is all you really ever have. So we have this ability, I think balance, the more you have, the more you have to give. And balance is probably the most important word in our vocabulary. And second is probably connection and how we connect. Margaret Mead said it beautifully. Never doubt what a small group of passionate citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, it's all that ever has. So it's on us, folks. It's on us. We can turn this ship around, but it's getting harder, and more of us need to connect and commit to justice
thank you for that.
and fight intolerance.
Thank you for that, John Rosenthal. Put your links in the chat, please. This has been the first hour of the 116th Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call, the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Zoom call, the GREE-GREE. We have had more than 70 people on for almost all the call, and we are going to break the tape right now. First hour will air at the Progressive Radio Network Thursday night, 5 p.m. based out of New York. And it has been live streaming. We're continuing to live stream. Thank you again, John Rosenthal, and thank you for bringing us David Hogg. And as I'm dead serious, we will come back and talk to you about the incredibly important steps forward in grassroots organizing. Our second hour